Thanks a lot for having me. I'm very happy to be here. I'm just reminded of the fact that if you don't have any hair, you lose a lot of heat from your head. This was like the primary cause of death of soldiers in the World Wars in Russia. I hope I'm going to survive.
Yeah, but then the angels know your thoughts, so there is.
That's true. So this is joint work with Leon and Dirk, both from the University of Pennsylvania, and it's on the medical expansion, life expectancy, and endogenous technical change. And to set the stage, so this is a quantitative theory paper, so it has both parts, but you could also say it has neither a quantitative paper nor a theory. So what we are after is I start with a bunch of facts. So this here is computed, smoothed cohort life expectancy. So it's the remaining life expectancy of someone who is born in a given year on the x-axis for the remaining years to live. Okay, so someone who is at the age of 20 in 2000 in the US that was born in the age of 1980, how many years does that person have to live? So it's not a cross-sectional concept, but a cohort concept. And what you see here, take away from this picture, is that until about 1850, life expectancy, remaining life expectancy was flat at about 40 years. Okay? And then it starts increasing. And it has been increasing since then, initially convex and then starting to be concave. The second fact is, if you look at per capita income, here on the log scale, in real terms, again starting in 1800 until today, what you observed is that this started increasing in 1820. Okay? And then since then has been growing at a rate of roughly 2%. So life expectancy increasing in 1850, per capita income in 1820. Okay. Third fact is, and for this one, unfortunately, we don't have this historical data. Here the data start in 1930. This is the spending share on modern health goods. Okay. So call this the modern health sector, as this will be the term we are going to use in the paper. The modern health sector is roughly constant. Here's different measures. Okay? So output share and spending share. Let's look at the output share. So this is the fraction of output produced in modern health goods relative to the total output in the US economy. Okay? And this has been flat until about 1950 and then increasing. Okay? And the point 1950 is that in the Second World War, penicillin was invented, and since then there's this widespread use and all these institutions were built in the health sector. That's part of the story, why this has started to increase. So what we want to do in this paper, we write a kind of unified growth theory set up with the health sector where we want to speak to these facts. So the three facts is life expectancy at the age of 20, remaining life expectancy flat until about 1840, 1850. Okay. Then starts to increase, and the modern health sector starts to increase about 100 years later, namely after 1950. Okay. And what we do here is we build a theory to explain these facts, a quantitative theory, predict the future, and then eventually to also evaluate policies. So this last one is in green, that's the wishful thinking, it's not yet there. The rest is here. Okay. And the blocks in our quantitative theory are, we take a life cycle model, a very simple diamond 2-period lived households OLG model. Okay? And that's where the quantitative theory part lies, because we bring that to the data, not a full-blown quantitative model, a very stylized one. Then we combine this with a model of endogenous health investment of the Grossman type, so that the probability to survive into the second period depends on the health investments. And the third element is an endogenous directed technical change channel. So there is going to be two sectors in the economy. One is producing modern health goods. The other sector is producing final consumption goods. Both sectors are modeled as symmetric, so in both sectors, technological change takes place through quality improvements, which I'm going to show you in detail. So the two building blocks in more detail is on the household side, households are two-period lived. They have an endogenous survival into the second period that depends on their health investments. Health spending comes in two forms. There's two health goods. One is basic hygiene good. So you will hear me also talking about washing your hands or boiling water. Okay, that's what we have in mind here. And the second one is the modern health services. Okay? And this is, in a way, the way we strip the household model is the core of what we are doing. And a lot of the things that are going to happen in terms of the dynamics of the model are baked into the household model by assumptions on functional forms. Our challenge is then throughout the paper to bring that to the data. But a lot of the action is baked in by assumptions, which I'm going to be very explicit about. And on the firm side, we basically borrow from Aghion and Howitt. So there's two firms, two sectors, health goods and final goods. In both sectors, there is monopolistic competition in intermediate inputs, which generates profits. Then there's a third layer. These are entrepreneurs, endogenous R&D entrepreneurs, that if they are successful, then they are going to collect these profits. Okay? This gives rise to an incentive to spend on innovation. And you will spend the more on innovation if from the final goods sector demand is higher. Hence, there is a market size effect in this model. If there is more demand for one sector than for the other sector, then resources will be reshuffled towards the sector where there is higher demand. And this R&D spending generates growth in both sectors through quality improvement, so it's a quality ladder model. And then in the quantitative implementation of this model, we bring it to initial conditions of the US economy and then try to explain the broad trends in the data. The main mechanism in this model is going to be that in the first phase, households are relatively poor. They have low productivity, low income. They just survive to the next period with a baseline survival probability, but they are not rich enough to invest more into health to increase that survival probability. Okay? So that means that in the initial phase, life expectancy is flat. At some point, through productivity improvements, incomes start to increase. And then if incomes relative to the price of modern health goods are high enough, then the modern health sector kicks off. And so I jumped to the third phase, sorry. The modern health sector kicks off. Before that, in phase 2, in between, households are rich enough, yet the price of the modern health sector is still too high for them to afford the modern health goods. So all they do is invest in the hygiene health good. Life expectancy starts increasing. Once they're sufficiently rich, they also start to invest into the modern health goods. Okay? Sorry, I just mixed up the phases, but that's the story. I will repeat it again. Good. So this is what triggers the entire dynamics in this economy. So what I'm going to do today is, yes, sure.
So if it's all about income and things like that, should we observe like cross-sectional heterogeneity in line with your story?
Yes, we don't do this here in this paper, but of course
Shouldn't the rich wash their hands in 1830?
They started earlier, yeah, the knowledge, of course, was dispersed in that way, but we are not addressing this here in this paper.
But they didn't wash their hands in the 1600s because they thought that they would get sick out of the water. And maybe they were right given the water quality at that time. But then there are beliefs, because in the Middle Ages there were, what you call the modern health sector, right? Like all sorts of products that people believe
And this is the
cure them. Leeches. Yeah. Leeches, yeah, you could mass produce leeches.
This is, it's a bit stylist what we are doing. We're looking at the US. So Middle Ages aren't here, right? We start a bit later than that. And so the historical data, which I showed you here, the historical data on life expectancy in the US, they start about 1890,
My
1880.
point is that you need some
1780.
institutional framework to complement your story. That is to say, maybe if intellectual property rights had existed in the Middle Ages, there
Yeah.
would have been huge innovations in the health technologies of those times.
I agree with that. So our institutional framework, so right now we don't look, for example, at the government as an institution. What you can think of, and this goes back to the income effects, right? What you could think of, an extension of this model would be there's some taxes on incomes that used for government spending that goes into the health sector. So then it's income effect in the end of the day again. Okay, but that's an extension we need to embed into this model. It's not yet there.
Isn't there also a reverse causality that people are getting healthier and as a result they make more investments into productivity growth as a result rather than cost? That's not something that
Not in the stylized model that we are writing down. So this is part of like a longer project for a more quantitative paper that we have in mind. This channel would be there. In the current framework, I have to think. In the current framework, it's not there. Okay, because it's very stylized. It's only this 2-period model, but in an extended one, it would be there. Okay, good. So what I'm going to do is illustrate this model. I calibrate it, replicate the facts quantitatively, and there's no institutions yet, no healthcare reforms yet. Okay. So there's a long list of related literature, but allow me to skip that. Oh, well, let's just briefly go through it. So it's Aguillon meets Crossman meets Diamond. That's what I already said. There's a literature on life expectancy, human capital, and technological progress, which we speak to, that looks at this kickoff through the lens of human capital models, closely related to our income channel. There's a literature on the normative analysis of optimal health and R&D spending, to which Chad Jones also contributed to. There's a literature on the reasons for the growth of health spending, where one part of what we also speak to is the price of health goods. You see that increasing, and there is a literature that says it's all the prices, and prices play a role in our model. We also go to literature on health spending and R&D factored, and also feedback, and to a literature on demographic change and technical change. Good. So for the remainder of the talk, what I'm going to do is I show you a little bit of more data, in addition to the data I already showed you. Then I develop the model, speak about calibration and results, and conclude. And about more data. I just mentioned that one of the mechanisms that's driving this increase in spending shares of health is the price effect. Okay? Now there's one data that is not affected by prices, at least not from the measurement side. It's pure quantity, and that's the employment share. Okay? And the employment share, so this is employment in the health sector relative to total employment in the US economy, has been constant until about 1940-50, and then increasing. Okay? If you look at the investment share, here unfortunately we don't have data before 1945. Okay? Investment share in health also increasing. Again, the same type of statistic, investment in the health sector relative to total investment in the US economy. This one is taken from your paper and extended a little bit. So this is the R&D spending share. Again, R&D spending in health relative to total R&D spending, increasing and then lately flattening out. It's different data sources, it's messy. I also wrote you an email in between asking you if there is like better data, but you said basically no. So we did our best to extend this a little bit beyond what you have in your paper, but this is the picture that we have at the moment. And here's the last fact, here's the price. Okay? The relative price increasing in health goods. So this is the price of modern health goods relative to the CPI, okay, the overall CPI. And you see this strong increase, and there is a discussion in the literature, first of all, that this is the main driving force for the high expenditures that we see, high expenditure growth. And second, that the BLS does not do the quality adjustment right. and the quality adjusted price would be much flatter, if not even decreasing. Okay? We don't really know how the facts exactly look like, but our model with an explicit notion of quality improvements can speak to that fact. Okay? And I'm going to show you the results on the price later and the quality adjusted price, and then go back to this picture.
Clearly the model has some notion of brands.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm struck that like maybe the U.S. is the worst country to do this because we have this big issue. Doctors getting grants, pharma companies getting grants. I wonder, what does the picture for employment and prices look like in Germany, UK?
Employment, I cannot tell you. We should look that up. Price, I also cannot tell you. What I can tell you is like the spending share. The spending share increase, that's a ubiquitous phenomenon.
Right, but the same magnitude or?
No, so the US is, it's a very good question, okay? The US is steeper than other countries, okay? In fact, of Germany, I know that before 1950, 1960, Germany had a higher spending share as a fraction of output than the US, and now the US is higher. So it's much steeper, okay? Now, what we do not...
Mostly due to the price effect.
No,
Mostly due to the price effect.
could be, and it could be that the price effect, part of that is an increase in monopolistic power, right, of people that extract rents in the sector. We don't go there yet. Okay? We have in mind changing the model in order...
Americans consume more and more health in volume relative to Germans.
produce. So another important extension of or line of research what could go into is the US being the leader country and the other countries are copying. Okay, that's why I emphasize produce, because they produce a lot of the modern health goods and then with the time like other countries copied it.
So these health goods are what? I mean, well, if the US
Think about an
exports-
X-ray.
Exports the drugs, is it counted in your health?
If they produce drugs, that's
they
that's
export.
measured. That they export, that's measured in our yes, that's included in our measure. And I mean, there's a lot of things a lot of papers one could additionally write, like explore the I/O component of the model more, which is there, but we don't really do much with it. Writing an international model about the US being the leading countries, other copying, we are not there yet. Okay, but this is interesting avenues for.
Copying what? Copying technologies? Or
Copying is not a good phrase by me, a word by me, expression. What I mean is technology spillovers.
nothing to do with tastes.
Not
What
directly.
you observe sociologically is that there is a pathologization of issues. Like before, you had, you were disappointed with your life and you were talking to the priest, and now you go to the psychiatrist. So it is part of health, and it used to be not part of health.
That's a good
And
point.
Similarly, people are consuming
Yeah.
lots of psychotropes, tranquilizers, whereas in the past they would get drunk, right? And so this is part of health. Whereas when you are getting drunk, which is probably
Yeah, there's
slightly better for your health, that was not counted as.
I never thought about this angle. So, but this is an interesting aspect that could also be there in the background.
That's,
Yeah.
The Americans are much more advanced in that process than
Could be.
Africa.
Could be. Okay. So let me lay down the economic model. So there is a two-sector model with endogenous technical change, two-sector OLG model. So on the household side, just to repeat this, households are two-period lived. They have an endogenous survival into the second period, and they have a demand for basic food or hygiene goods and the modern health goods. And then on the production side, there is this firms and technology in the two sectors of production. And all of the quality improvement or the growth dynamics come from this endogenous growth setup in this multi-layer production sector. And that's what I'm going to lay out now. And I spend a lot of time on the household side, which is, throughout we assume a small open economy. Okay? So we keep the interest rate constant, and this is mostly for technical reasons, which I'm happy to talk about more. Good. Household on one slide. So the slide is
Only capital is mobile. No? I mean,
only capital is mobile.
Health goods are not mobile.
No. We contrast it with a closed economy, the model. But for computational reasons, which I'm going to lay out also the computational algorithm, how we solve this model. The small open economy makes it incredibly simple, okay, because it's basically a sequence of almost static problems. And the closing the interest rate, it's simply not done yet. It's not completed yet.
Small open economy and all goods are tradable, then the income effects in that economy are not going to affect
No, that's true.
production of health goods.
Yes. Only in that economy. Okay. Good. So households, what are households doing? They consume when young, they consume when old, and they save, and they do an investment in health goods. There's a composite investment good denoted I, and there are the two goods, modern health good IH, and the hygiene health good, which is part of the final consumption, which is then IF for final. Okay. Preferences, households weigh utility when young and when old, okay, from consumption, and they survive into the second period with some survival probability psi. I'm starting to shiver again. Sorry about that. With some probability psi, that depends on the investment that they do. Okay? In first period, utility is simply CRA. Second period is the same, but there is a preference shifter, a value of life parameter, which is important in the model for the utility of surviving to be positive. So whenever a sigma is above 1, we need this positive shift term. Okay? So we call this also a no suicide condition and need beta be sufficiently large so that people do not voluntarily commit suicide because their utility of survival is negative. Okay?
That means the utility of being dead is 0.
Yes, it's normalized to 0, which you see here because there's no...
If it's minus infinity.
Sure. Sure. But in that sense, the B parameter is always relative, right? Right? But we need it, this is like part of the answer would also be like we need it in order to get some of the dynamics going, we need some parameter, and if we were only to set utility from this to minus infinity, we wouldn't have that additional calibration, right? So now this is important here, the investment function, the survival probability, how it depends on investment, okay? It's a simple concave function, and this power parameter is going to play a crucial role later. So the elasticity to 1 unit of investment is going to play a role later. So let me point it out here. More important for us is how the investment composite itself looks like. The first thing I want to point out is there is a baseline parameter here, the nu, and that's going to imply that there is a baseline survival probability even if investment is equal to 0. Even if IH and IF are equal to 0, you still have positive investment of nu, and so you're going to survive. So that's the baseline survival probability in the initial years until 80-50. Okay? Then thereafter, what is relevant here is this quasi-linear structure that we have here. And that's what I said in the introduction. A lot of the things that we are doing are baked into the model by assumptions on functional forms. We just had the baseline survival probability. The other one is this quasi-linear structure, which implies that if as incomes are growing, initially, if you're not yet income rich enough, you're only going to consume IF, the hygiene health good. Only if income is high enough, you're going to consume both goods, IH and IF. Okay? So this generates the second kickoff of the modern health sector, consumption of IH being positive, if income relative to the cost of the health goods is sufficiently high. Finally, the budget constraint is you spend on consumption goods, you spend on the health goods, the modern health goods has the price, P. The final goods sector is the numeraire and the savings. And on your income side, you earn wages and you receive transfers of those that died from the previous period, okay, that didn't survive. Accidental bequests are redistributed to the generations. And in the second period, you consume from your savings.
So it's a hierarchy of needs model where, in some sense,
I what?
L,
I?
But
You-
the informal health,
IF.
IF, sorry. IF comes before IH, right?
IF comes before H, yeah.
Which, you know, you might say, if IH is, you know, getting your hips, if IH is plastic surgery, that makes sense.
Yes.
If IH is a cancer cure,
It's also there.
and IF is washing your hands, it's not so clear that, you know, in other conditions would not hold for a cancer cure.
In the sequence over time, that's how we think about this. Washing your hands comes first. And this is only a stand-in like for the theory of germs,
Take
right?
it statically, okay?
Statically.
I have cancer.
In a
What's
static,
the marginal utility of washing my hands compared to the marginal utility of getting a cancer cure? If I get zero cancer cure, the marginal utility of the cancer cure might be very high. So by specifying this structure, you are somehow stating that IH is a sort of luxury good, that it's that, you know, when you don't have it, it's less important than when you don't have IF.
yes, but I think, yes, yes,
Technologies like plastic surgery,
yeah,
but not all of them.
Well, could
Okay.
that be drinking water or eating food? You know, there's all these investments in health, which, you know, it's not, you know, if I don't drink water,
Maybe.
that's an investment in my longevity, but I do that before I get. So I guess if we interpret it broadly, then
I think, I mean, we interpret it very broadly, and we interpret it certainly in terms of dynamics over time.
Veil of ignorance.
Okay, thanks. Good, so now in terms of how the dynamics in this model look like, let's go into the three phases, and that's what I said in the introduction. I'm going to repeat it. So think about a situation in which total resources, cash at hand, so just cash at hand is the sum of wages and the transfers from accidental bequests, okay? So if cash at hand relative to the price of modern health goods, okay, which is the shadow price if the sector is not yet active, the price it would be if the sector were active, okay? If your purchasing power, so to say, increases over time, so X over P is increasing over time, then in this economy we will have three phases. In the first phase, up to some threshold in time, up to some time period, T1, there is not going to be any investment into survival, into health, and we are just at this minimum baseline survival probability. Economy until 80-50. The second phase is in between until period T2. Given the quasi-linear structure, now you are sufficiently rich, but the price of the modern health goods is still relatively high. Given the quasi-linear structure that we assume on the investment function, you're then going to decide to only invest in the final goods, but not in the modern health goods. Okay? But then life expectancy starts increasing. And at some point in the third phase, you're sufficiently rich relative to the price of the modern health sector, and the modern health sector comes into existence, life expectancy is further increasing, and part of the increase of life expectancy now comes from spending on modern health goods. Towards the end, if I come to it, I'm going to show you a decomposition of how much of the trends in life expectancy we produce in the model comes from the final goods sector, and how much the modern health sector adds on top. Okay? Good, and then in the very, very long run, this economy is going to converge to a balanced growth path in which both sectors, in which there is some positive investments and some positive consumption, both sectors are active under certain conditions, which I'm going to explain. On the production side. On the production side, so there is these two sectors, final goods and health goods. They are both producing with a constant returns to scale production function using labor and a continuum of intermediate inputs, Y, I, that come at quality I. Okay? And firms take as given the qualities of the intermediate inputs as well as the price of their output good, which they produce, and the prices of the intermediate inputs yi. And they then choose how much to produce and how much to employ of labor and the intermediate goods. And from that, we get an inverse demand function for the intermediate goods that's characterized like this. So this one is now going to be relevant in the intermediate goods sector. In the intermediate goods sector, we have a monopolistic competition for a variety of different products produced by monopolists. And we have a very simple production function. Production only takes place with capital and full depreciation. And these firms now take as the intermediate good firms take as given the inverse demand function, which I just characterized on the previous slide, as well as the market interest rate, R, which is constant. And now, given that output is produced only with capital, price times capital, taking the inverse demand function as given, this here is the price, times capital gives us this here, minus the costs, production, then gives us, that's the IO element in the paper, some markup over prices. And as we just discussed, if we were to speak to increasing rents, this would be in the model a time-varying alpha, but alpha at the same time is the labor share in the economy, so we tie our hands at the moment, right? That's why we don't touch it. We would need an additional element to disentangle increasing monopoly power from the labor share in that model. That's why we don't go there, okay? So we keep it as simple as it is here. Good. Now these models, so that's Aghion and Howitt, they have nice aggregation properties. The ratio of capital to quality is constant across all varieties. And this, that comes from the first order condition, and this gives rise to very nice aggregation results. So that in the end of the day, this entire heterogeneity by varieties doesn't matter. The model aggregates, and we have production functions only for the sector-specific output in terms of the average or aggregate quality in that sector. Right? And the distribution of income in the economy goes to labor, capital, and to the profits. Now what happens with these profits? There's going to be these R&D investors, entrepreneurs, per each variety, and they choose resources and innovation. And if they are successful, if their success in innovation is probabilistic, the probability of being successful in innovation increases in the resource spending. Right? And if you are successful in innovation, then the quality of your products increases by factor lambda, which is the growth element in the model. And if you are successful, you also collect the profits. So that the entrepreneur's problem is to maximize profits given the success probability function here and the innovation spending, and that gives us some solution for innovation spending. If you're not successful, then the randomly drawn entrepreneur gets assigned profits and the quality is constant. So that means that growth in this economy is going to be a weighted average between those that experience quality improvement and those that do not. So that growth in this economy, if you think about, again, aggregating across all entrepreneurs, you get a fraction of successful innovators. Okay? So that growth in this model is just a weighted average, as I said, with the share of the successful innovators. Their quality increases by lambda, and the non-successful ones, their quality stays constant, and this gives us growth. The important thing is that for the share of successful innovators to increase in one sector relative to the other one, there must be more innovation spending in that sector. For there to be more innovation spending, there must be higher profits in that sector. For there to be higher profits, there must be higher demand, and that's the market size effect in these models. Okay? And that channels over time the resources towards the modern health sector away from the final goods sector. So that the growth rate in this economy is parameterized by lambda and the endogenous share of innovators. Now, we will add an additional adjustment to the model which I'm going to talk about labor flows across the two sectors in the calibration. Absent this adjustment, the price in the health sector is inversely related to the relative qualities. The adjustment that we are going to do on imperfect labor substitutability, which I'm going to talk about later, is going to mute that mechanism a little bit. But in principle, we can think about prices in one sector fall if quality improves relative to the other sector. And we mute that direct relationship in the model with an additional mechanism that I'm going to explain later. And what is important for us is later, if we redo the quality adjustment, then the quality adjusted quotes and quotes price is P times QH over QS. The balanced growth path in this model will feature constant expenditures on the modern health good, on savings and on consumption. And it exists if the elasticity of substitution and the elasticity of your survival probability in investment satisfies a knife-edge condition. And the knife-edge condition is that the elasticity parameters are linked in this particular way. Now, you have written a paper where you say you don't believe that knife-edge condition. You want to have a corner solution with only the health sector dominating. We think about this knife-edge condition as being actually nice because we think that in the long run there will be a positive share of both sectors in the economy, and it in a way disciplines our calibration because we get rid of one parameter. Okay? But we can certainly debate about this a long time if this is reasonable or not.
Yeah, no, I just want to highlight what the condition is, because it's not something you'd necessarily expect. I agree, it's nice this way. I mean, in some sense, the value of life is rising because there's an income effect here in the model, and that's your sigma. So life is getting more valuable, there's sharply diminishing returns to consumption. I'll talk about that parameter later. And then the C parameter is diminishing returns in the health technology and the production function. So one's a utility function parameter, one's a production function parameter, and it could be that those things just happen to be equal, but it would be remarkable, right?
Yes.
But
In-
there are a class of models that are not isoelastic, or nothing is isoelastic, and they converge to a BGP where locally this kind of things holds.
Maybe
I
we
mean,
should write that paper.
Does not already exist.
In a way, for a large part of what we are doing here, it's entirely irrelevant because we don't look at the very long run. We only look at the transition. Okay? Of course, the two things are related, right? This is what we do. We here live with this restriction, and which, as I said, simplifies our life because we get rid of one calibration parameter, one degree of freedom less. But we can certainly talk about this more over coffee, how reasonable or unreasonable that assumption is. Good. Now, in terms of 5 minutes, that's amazing. Okay. In terms of the dynamics of this economy, so the state is the qualities into the sectors, the size of the population, and the savings from the previous period because they determine the amount of accidental bequests. Then, given that the interest rate is constant, we basically have a sequence of static equilibria that makes it very easy to solve this model. So then from the household side, we get an update of spending. Spending gives us life expectancy, hence an update of the population. Spending gives us also savings. And then from the firm side of the model, giving the relative price determines the labor shares and the innovation, the share of innovators, and that gives us an update of the qualities. And then the next period starts. And so it's very easy to solve this model. Good. Calibration and results. Let's not talk too much about this slide here. The only thing that I want to point out is we add one important element, and that is a non-standard assumption on an aggregation of labor across the two sectors. What it gives us in a very simple functional form is an imperfect elasticity of workflows from the one sector to the other, which helps us to smooth the entire transition. Okay? It's close to perfect substitutes in the current calibration, but not yet. And that not yet helps us in order to smooth the dynamics in the model. Good. Now we are going to calibrate this model in 40-year sequences because it's a 2-period OLG model, so it's 40 years. So we only have 3 phases. Very few. The 3 phases only cover very few years. One is before 1820, phase 1. Then 1860 and 1900. Phase 2, where spending on final goods takes place in the health sector. And the third phase is where also the modern health sector is active. Okay. Future question would be the optimal role or the role of R&D spending, spending by the government in this model, which is not there yet. Good. Then one other thing I want to point out in the calibration, we make the growth factor sector dependent, and the rest is not so important. So now, easy for us to match log of GDP per capita. If you have a growth model, you only have to calibrate the growth rates right, you get this. Okay? Easy for us, but I should say, like, in terms of matching, this is 1820, 1860, 2000, 2040, 1860, 1820, 1860, 1900, 1940, 1980, 2020. Okay? Very simple few data periods. Life expectancy. Also relatively easy to match in this model, but what is nice that the model also produces this initial concavity in life expectancy, convexity, and then it gets linear, and then at some point it will also get concave. Okay? Don't ask me why we get it. We still have to understand it better, but it's nice that we have this feature, at least. Good. Then in terms of how much employment goes into the health sector relative to the rest of the economy, the model overshoots. Okay? Likewise, in terms of the output share, model also overshoots. Here's what I mentioned about this price increase. Given this imperfect labor substitutability across sectors, despite the fact that productivity in the health sector is increasing relative to the final goods sector, this labor supply reaction makes the price of health increase in the health sector. Okay, so it's an additional element. And if we undo the quality adjustment, then what I mentioned in the introduction, that this strong price increase that we observe could indeed be that the BLS does not do the quality adjustment right, which our model would also say. Okay? Now, decomposition exercise, people living in Japanese islands where they eat very healthy good and do not produce much of the modern health sector is here in this model, because a lot of the trends in life expectancy, that's the green line, would also take place without the modern health sector being active. But its role, it's becoming increasingly important over time. Okay? Standing in for the fact that with modern health spending, we increase the probability of survival after age 50, after age 60, because of better cancer treatment, and so on in modern societies. Okay, let me conclude right on time, right? More or less. So we generate this model, we develop this model that generates a kickoff in life expectancy and later the modern health sector, explain the positive trend in health spending shares, positive trends in health employment, R&D spares, and the increasing relative price of health. And if we predict this model further, at some point the increasing life expectancy will come to a halt by construction. And what we haven't done yet is the entire policy elements, so that's future work. Thanks a lot.
Just a small question. Do you have a sense of why the model overshoots in the employment? My guess would be that there's a lot of R&D that's not coming from the US. So better.
What we haven't done yet, we haven't exploited the R&D parameters in the model yet. That could help us. Okay? That could be one of the reasons, but I'm not sure. Okay? I said in between, this model is very simple to solve. That's only part of the story, because to calibrate it, it's more difficult.
So my understanding that in the model currently, the research just comes from the household side. There's no government interval. But when you somehow calibrate this model, you are using the US data, so it already incorporates all the government spending
that
if
for
you count for all
Yeah.
the R&D research.
yeah
government
for the,
spending.
for the last statement that might be correct. For everything else that happens in this model, I think nothing big would change if we model an explicit tax system that redistributes channels towards the government and that puts money into the health sector. We would, of course, have to recalibrate everything, but in the end of the day, it would still be income effects driving the dynamics. But for the last point, I fully agree with what you said.
All right, let's stop there.
Good. Thank you.